All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the QBuild Southeast Queensland industry briefing session for the upcoming lift tenders in 2021. I'm Ronan Carney. I'm from the QBuild Southeast Queensland service maintenance team. I primarily look after the fire contracts, and we also have presenting today Nick Rhodes, who's also in the Southeast Queensland service maintenance team, and Nick is heavily involved with the management and running of the lift contracts statewide. We both have got lots of experience with managing all these contracts, and Nick has been managing the contracts for at least 5 years. So we're here today to go through some information that we have and some guidance that we have, things that we're looking for in the upcoming tender for the lift contracts. These are Southeast Queensland and some of them are statewide. We'll talk about the improvements that we've done to the way that we tender and the way that we manage the contracts and any simplified processes we've done to help you with the tendering as well. Throughout the presentation, you can type in the conversation box, any questions that you might have, and I'll try to answer them as we're going through the presentation. And we'll also open up the presentation to questions and answers at the end of the presentation. What we're doing as in QBuild, we are trying to support regional development, reduce red tape for the Queensland government, making tenders simpler, making your packages smaller, and trying to open it up to as many tenders and contractors as possible. We offer better services for Queenslanders, such as the apprenticeship training programs that QBuild are running, and we deliver value for money by continuously upgrading our contracts, making them simpler and easier to manage and making everything more efficient, such as the use of the web portal that we have on our contracts. Who are QBuild? In the agenda today, we'll talk about who is QBuild, the services that we provide, opportunities that we have coming up in this financial year, quick brief overview of the service maintenance, innovations that we have done, tender timeframes, tender documents. I'll talk about the pricing, non-pricing workbooks. We'll hand over to Nick to go into the detail about the contract documentation. The contract management plan is a new document we've introduced into management of contracts over the last 5 years. We'll talk about that. Any additional information that we have, and at the end, some questions and answers. So who are QBuild? We're a service maintenance construction design team that is within the Department of Energy and Public Works. We were previously called Building and Asset Services, and before that we were called QBuild before. So we've been around, we've been established for quite a long time, and we've got quite a lot of experienced people working in our area. We've got multiple regional offices throughout Queensland. Each of them have got their service maintenance team, delivery teams, and in Central Queensland, we've got our major design team in technical services. We outsource over 90% of our work to the industry through a variety of sourcing solutions, such as design solutions, where we're designing buildings. We will do around 10% of the work in-house. The more specified design works particular to correctional centres, but all the rest of the work, the run-of-the-mill day-to-day design work, we outsource everywhere. Same with service maintenance. We outsource the vast majority of, actually we outsource all of the lift service maintenance. We outsource all the fire service maintenance. We don't do any of that in-house. There's only some of the work, such as apprenticeship training programs, that we will keep in-house for ongoing improvement of skills and trades within Queensland. But as I said, the majority of it is done external. Within Queensland, we've got 6 regions covering the entire state. Myself and Nick, we're based in Southeast Queensland. Our office is at Cannon Hill. So we previously used to be in Roma Street. We're now in Cannon Hill. So any monthly meetings or 6 monthly yearly meetings or meetups that we'd like to do, we'll be doing it in the office. At the moment, we'll try and do it online, but primarily we will do it in the office. In southeast Queensland, it goes from the Gold Coast all the way up to the roughly Gympie area and all the way west out towards the ranges. We've got Ipswich office, South Coast office at Robina, and Sunshine Coast office at Caboolture. The service maintenance person who could be managing this contract could be based in any of those offices, but it will continue to be Nick Roads. But we do have ability to meet at any of those offices. And we've got the Southwest Queensland region, which covers off Toowoomba, Roma, Charleville, all the way out to Cameron's Corner. And we've got 2 offices in that area as well. And we call it the Southwest Queensland region. Wide Bay is slightly the middle of Queensland, but it's on the coast around Rockhampton and Gladstone. Oh, excuse me, Bundaberg and Maryborough. A couple of the lifts that will be on the contracts will be in that area as well in the major cities. Central Queensland, we've got several small offices, but generally it's ran out of the Rockhampton area. That covers all the way from the coast, all the way into the borders of South Australia, I believe it is. So the North Queensland area is all the way from Townsville over to the Northern Territory. So that's a huge area, and we've got a lot of very remote areas in that region. So do keep an eye on the tender workbooks to determine if there's any lifts out that area. It can be quite difficult to get to and achieve your KPIs. No more than in the far North Queensland office. We'll have regional weathers and water floods that can impact on access to sites in there, so you gotta be mindful of your scheduling. The core services of Queensland, we are a procurement, project management, risk management, contract management company. So the likes of service maintenance, we contract manage all the service maintenance contracts, while the potential awarding contractors will be our subcontractors. So we'll be the principal contractor, you'll be our subcontractors. No more than in building works, where they build an awful lot of projects. And then when it comes to project management, we can also be the superintendent's rep managing contracts. We can be the project managers managing the contracts with builders and designers as well. We do a lot of major facilities, stadiums, Queensland, correctional centres, and we manage them in the facilities management field as well. We do a lot of soft cleaning contracts. So with all the COVID-19 cleaning, we do deliver all of that for our clients as well. We enable our clients to achieve any of their objectives. So our clients will be Department of Education, Queensland Police, Queensland Practice Services, Department of Justice and JAG, and many more departments. And of course, as I said, I keep saying, we do a lot of design works for them as well. Upcoming in 2021 to 22, we've got fire contracts going out to tender. We've got 3 lift contracts that are going out to tender, and lots of soft cleaning contracts that are going out, which is cleaning and horticultural services. But of course, throughout the entire year, we'll also have plenty of building, design, and minor repair work projects that will be available on QTender and the QBuild eTender web pages. So I would advise everyone to make sure that you're registered or that you subscribe to those web pages to find out any opportunities for lists that might be ongoing. We would have programs, let's say with Department of Housing, where there might be similar defects across a wide range of houses in particular regions. We might bundle that together and go out on QTender to get all them repaired. We've ongoing low to medium value works where we would engage you by doing local quoting. So our delivery teams in our regions would approach you on a sole supply or select tender process to ask you to quote for works and do repairs. Our hard FM facilities, This is where we're going out to tender with the lift contracts. We refer to the lift contracts as hard FM contracts. We've got fire, which are all the fire panels and detectors and hydrants and so forth. They're all out to tender as well. We're not going out to tender so much with sewerage or hydraulics, but year ones are all the transport packages. So when we're talking about transport, your contracts will have anything from a dummies lift or to a hoist or to escalators within each of those contracts. So do keep an eye on the description of what it is that you're tendering for. We're hoping to go to tender within the next week to 2 weeks for all the lift contracts. We're just currently waiting on the workbooks to be finalized before we go to tender, and they'll be out to tender for about 4 weeks. At the same time, concurrently, we will have a lot of soft contracts going to tender for cleaning, pest hygiene and management, waste collection services and horticultural contracts. And there's a lot of them contracts going out to tender. So do keep an eye out if you've got branches in your companies that do soft maintenance cleaning. There'll be plenty of opportunity there too. So statewide, we look after 8,600 sites. So that's a huge amount of sites statewide that we do. And when you look at your workbooks, that will be reflective in your workbooks, the quantity of that would have lifts in them. We manage over near 40,000 systems and equipment and nearly 1 million items of plant. So each lift we would consider a plant, but then you'd have a lift system at a school, which might have 10 plants. And then you'd have a site that they would be at. So not particularly a building, you have many buildings on the site, but we refer to a site, not a building. So with that quantity of plant, we have become extremely efficient and proactive in the way that we manage those contracts, because we have to be. You can't manage 1 million plant items without being efficient. So we take any of your feedbacks quite seriously. So over the last couple of years of tender and managing the contracts, we've tried to implement as many processes as possible, improvements to processes as possible to streamline that management of plant. Some of that does rely on the contractors providing us with information to keep them up to date, changes of plant, changes of names, make, model, serial numbers, and all that. For soft contracts, we manage 1,300 locations across the state. So you can see there's a difference of around 7,000 where those sites, such as schools, manage their own cleaning, but we still do a huge amount of locations for cleaning contracts. One of the big improvements that we've done over the last 7 years, actually, is the improvements to the web portal. So we brought in the web portal around 7 years ago, and then about 4 years ago, we released version 2 of the web portal. And this is where all the contractors will update and the work order progress, where you'll upload all of your service reports and any defect repairs that you would do on defective work orders. It says in the presentation it can take up to 5 minutes per work request or work order to enter in all the data. But when you're doing this on a regular basis, you can actually get that down to, I think, approximately 28 seconds is what one contractor told me. So you can streamline that and it can get pretty simple. The web portal comes with a training document. So you just log online through a web page, but there is a training document that comes with that. It's 29 pages long, but trust me, the devil is in the detail, only around 3 pages of this. So updating a work order and completing a work order, that's about all that you would need to know. So that's around 3 pages of information in there. It is quite straightforward, but some of the information that is quite important in there is your actual start time, your actual finish time, when you invoice through the web portal. So we ask all the contractors keep good records of when you start your work on site and when you finish your work on site. It is quite important. On the web portal, we actually ask contractors to submit any forms that you may have, but for the lift contracts, your only forms that you would have would be a safe to operate certificate, which is provided yearly in July for the previous financial year. So you can send all them in one email in one go to the contract manager, and that's about all that you would need. We've updated our condition assessment spreadsheet. Sorry, what used to be previously a hard copy sheet that your technicians used to populate manually. We've updated that now to be an electronic format. So you can see the information that we have. We ask you to verify that information on site, but also we ask you to do a yearly condition rating of the equipment. We give you all the details what those ratings can be populated with, but one of the biggest improvements we've done to the previous contracts is we've asked the contractors now to provide make, model, serial number, quantity of items on site, when it was installed. So it's a bit more information we've asked you to populate where it's missing and to verify where it is populated. We ask for that to be done at the yearly service, so at least once a year that's done. And with these being 5-year contracts, you'd have to do that 5 times. So do read through that technical specification, specification number 15, as that will take time for your technicians to populate. Some contractors have taken a step forward and actually put an app on their phone and that they've designed and managed themselves to populate that data on their phone themselves. Some have used the likes of Simpro, where they set up a couple of questions for the technician to populate, and then someone in an office manually enters that into our spreadsheet and sends it back to us. We use the web portal to give us a good background onto your KPIs, but we have introduced the KPIs on the service contract reports that we expect from the contractor. I would like to point out to incumbent contractors that the performance schedules on the lift contracts will be more rigorously monitored for your KPI performance. So we'll be asking you to provide more information than what you've previously provided, but do read the technical specification, as that's what we're expecting from you, what's written into that technical specification. So that's what we're saying, make sure that your completion of your work is done within the time frame and is processed through the online web portal on time. It's very important you get all the work done on time. We also, regarding the on-time factor, we've also introduced a fortnightly report that emails out automatically to all the contractors and tells them what work orders have not been finalized through the web portal. That's what is your scheduled work that has not been done within the tolerance and why is it not done. So we do give you information to help you keep on track, but we expect you to monitor your own KPI and feed any issues back. So communication is quite key in that regard. So with our invitation to offer, we have set these contracts up to be statewide contracts. For smaller, more competitive works, they would be set up in a geographic location like Southeast Queensland Fire, or the Brisbane Metro cleaning, but these lift contracts, with them being spread out statewide, we manage it statewide, and the tenders are for statewide processes. And we've got a lot of how-to guides in the tender packages, and if there's anything that you're unsure of, we've got a 4-week tender period, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout that tender period. There's plenty of time there for us to get you back responses and address any concerns or issues that you might have. Our invitation to offer process is governed by the Queensland procurement policy, and we've also got our internal performance management framework, which helps us not only manage the going out to tender process, but also the setting up of the contracts, managing the contracts, closing out the contracts, and performance management. So we've got a lot of great tools there that we use and apply to all of our contracts. Even, for example, even though the contracts ask for monthly reports, monthly meetings, if you're performing quite well, we use that performance management framework to actually extend the meetings out to bi-monthly or quarterly timeframes, so that we're not being bogged down in all the reporting, that we can let you get on with doing the work, especially where you are performing. We've provided long-term contracts. So instead of going out with 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contracts, we're actually going out with a 5-year contract. And where we don't change the contracts too much, or where the contracts contract documentation hasn't changed, we'll go with a 5-year contract with an option to extend, and we would take that availability to extend that contract. So it could possibly be a 10-year contract. And of course, we try our best with this invitation to offer to keep our partners quite happy. So we've invited all of our partners and our clients to be part of the evaluation teams to help us with that process, so that they can see what we're doing and learn and help us and give us feedback on the tendering process as well. We also, when we're tendering, we're looking for contractors who've got very good workplace health and safety policies and procedures. Now, one of the core policies of the QBuild is workplace health and safety. So with us being a leader in the building and maintenance areas, we take workplace health and safety very serious, and hence that's why it's KPI 1. So try and focus on that and trying all of our workers, employees and clients and customers in a very safe manner and zero hazard free. So with the likes of these items that are here in this slide, we're actually referring to your non-price criteria items that we're looking for and we're trying to see. We're looking for contractors who've got a capability to undertake the work and to do it in a professional and timely manner. So does your office have the scope to achieve the response times, especially where it's a comprehensive contract? Where have you demonstrated that capability previously, and can you do that on our contracts? Unfortunately, these contracts don't meet the requirements for requiring training. So there is a clause in the contract that talks about training and training requirements, and they're not applicable on these contracts. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And wherever we are improve our processes, we're looking for contractors who can work with QBuild and continuously help us to improve, give us good feedback, and also to work with us where we come up with new innovations and work with you to try to streamline those innovations a little bit better. So with these lift contracts, we're hoping to go out to tender, I think by the 28th. Sorry, by the 26th of February, we should have all these 3 lift contracts out to tender. They'll be available on eTender, and they'll be advertised in QTender. So you can go to either of those web pages and you can download those documents. The tender closing date will be 4 weeks from the tender issue date. So if these are staggered in their issue on eTender, each one will be staggered closing with a 4-week time frame for each contract. It'll take us a couple of weeks to evaluate the tenders, go to our clients, get their feedback, get their approval, to go through our shortlisting and administration and setting up the contracts. So we're looking at a turnaround with a award in potentially May, and then creation of the work orders and so forth in June. Then we should hit the ground running on the 1st of July 2021. These are the three contracts that we have out to tender. So we've got a statewide lift contract, that's 3007. Then we've got a Southeast Queensland and Darling Downs lifts, a Southeast Queensland and Wide Bay Burnett region lifts. All right, so not all three contracts are statewide, so do look in those pricing workbooks to figure out the portion of Southeast Queensland to the regional areas to give you a little bit of an understanding how to schedule your work and how to meet our performance requirements and the attendances to those sites. Just on that as well, even though these contracts do cover off other regions, Far North Queensland, Wide Bay, Darling Downs, they'll all be managed centrally in the Southeast Queensland region by Nick Rhodes and his team. Now the workbooks have changed slightly, so those who would have priced previously, you'll be able to quickly identify the changes to those workbooks. The changes have only been minor, they haven't been major, but the changes have been introduced based on feedback from previous tenders. Everything that is identified in a blue color on the pricing workbook is required to be populated. Now that's your pricing per frequency of schedule, and the total prices will be populated automatically into a yellow cell. You can't pick and choose what plant or what system that you want to do. These are all-encompassing contracts. We require you to populate all of the blue cells. If we had 3 sites and you put in the prices for only 1 site, we would consider that an alternative offer, and we may not evaluate that if we had other tenders just populate the entire workbook. So we implore you to populate everything to improve your chances of getting through the tender evaluation process. If we have any issues with your workbook, such as if you fail to populate cells, we'll identify that pretty quickly. We'll get back to you and we'll ask you some questions about why that was not populated. On the pricing workbooks, we got lots of instructions, and it sets it out how to populate, how you are to populate the workbook. Now, these have gone out to hundreds and hundreds of contractors, and any feedback we've had from them have been put in and improved into the workbook. So I believe these are very simple and very easy to follow, especially when you look at this tab, the pricing instructions, and when you read the information on what needs to go in, it tells you exactly what needs to be populated. The pricing schedule on the pricing workbook refers to the site address, the site name, and what the plant is. So under equipment description 2, that's what the plant is. Is it a lift? Is it a dump lift? Is it a elevator or a travelator? It's all dated there. We'll identify how many lifts are on site in the total count, and we'll also identify the frequency of the services. It is here. The frequency will be identified, but we also have the major month that the major services are to be scheduled in, and we also have any major dates of major services identified in the workbook as well. The pricing workbook will automatically put a blue cell for where you're to put that appropriate level of service into the pricing workbook. Under this column here, it says service maintenance condition assessment required. That is, do you need to do a condition assessment? Do you need to populate the spreadsheet for that plant? For all of the lift plant, you must have a condition assessment completed for it annually. So there's no plant that do not require this. Everything must have it done. Make, model, serial numbers will be populated where we know it. And extended description will identify any site-specific information such as services to be done outside business hours, any special attendance requirements, anything that might talk about fire ants, it's all in there. So I implore all the contractors to read those cells quite diligently and make sure that you understand what is written there. If there's anything missing from there or anything that you've got any queries about, please send in an RFI to the procurement team during the tender process. This is a blank workbook. There's nothing populated, but you can see here where the blue cells are populated. So for this yearly service, if I populate $100, it'll populate $100 for every single year until if I went up to year 3, and if I said I'll put in 120, it'll populate all the future pricing for year 3, 4, and 5 to be 120. The one change that we've made to this spreadsheet is we've added in a percentage increase for year 2. Now, if you chose to leave that blank, you're not entitled to the CPI increase as published on the Queensland Treasury webpage. If you wanted to add a percentage increase per year, say 1.5%, that will increase all the CPI by 1.5% every year for the rest of the contract period. If you wanted to do a different CPI for year 3, 4, and 5, you'd have to populate those cells as well. Now, some people use that to apply what they forecast the CPI to be each year, and then they apply that in there. If you were to make a mistake when you're populating the pricing workbook, as it is a formal tender, that becomes your formal price. We cannot allow any additional claims to be made if you make a mistake in the pricing. So if you put a decimal point in the wrong place, you know, we've got to hold you to it. So it's important that you make sure that the pricing is correct when you're populating the workbook. Also, when you're pricing on the pricing workbook, price what the information is in the workbook, not what you know and believe is on site. Okay, so we want everyone to price based on the same information, so please populate what you read in that pricing workbook and what is in the contract, not what you know to be in the real life. There are clauses in the conditions of contract that refer to emergency lifts. Now, as we are aware, there are no emergency lifts identified in the pricing workbooks. So even though there may be an emergency lift on site, we've not identified any lift as an emergency lift in the tender workbooks. So just be mindful of that when you're working through it. If you find any emergency lifts and you're awarded the contract, we'll issue that as a variation of the contract and update the pricing accordingly. Now, just going to load up the non-price workbook. Oh, sorry. Under the pricing workbook, we will also ask you to put in a schedule of rates. And this is your schedule of rates of your different level of technicians and any other type of service that we may have identified in the workbook. I just want to bring your attention to this improvement here that we have done. Because of a 5-year contract, we need to know the prices per year, every year for the 5 years. Now, if you were to just populate $100 as a normal tradesperson price, and you choose not to apply CPI, it will just put 100 every cell, unless you actually go into that cell and put in a different price. As you can see, if I put in $150 into year 3, year 4 and 5 automatically become $150. So if you knew there was a new enterprise bargaining agreement and prices were, or wages were going to increase by, say, 30%, you could forecast that and allow for it in your labor rates. Now, this CPI box here is different to the pricing schedule CPI in its intent. If you don't populate this CPI increase or percentage increase per year, you're not entitled to CPI as published on the Queensland Treasury webpage. But if you leave this here as no, like, do you require any future increases to be determined by the CPI applied? It's asking you, you know, you'll have the Queensland Treasury published CPI, but do you want to use a different figure to that? If you choose no, we will accept that where CPI is applied by Queensland Treasury for any prices on this tab, we will automatically award you that. But if you say yes, then if you say yes, we use the CPI. If you choose no, we use whatever figures you determine. Do also read through this pricing workbook, breakdown rates and schedule of equipment replacements. There'll be a whole heap of standard work there that we ask you to price and populate into your workbook. The same applies on the breakdown maintenance tab. So you can populate that in the same manner as you do tab 7, schedule of rates. In the non-pricing workbook, we do have instructions at the forefront of the workbook. That's pretty self-explanatory, this workbook. But in the non-price criteria, this tab 2, it is very important that you populate as much information as possible. Now, we do have to say we will only evaluate you on the information that you provide in here. So if you've been working with QBuild for the last 15, 20 years, you can't turn around and say, look, Nick Rhodes knows who I am. I don't need to populate this. I can just say, you know, refer to Nick. Because Nick may not be involved in the valuation panel, his comments will be negligible in the situation. We can only tender you on the information. Sorry, we can only evaluate you on the information that you provide here. Now, if you wish to provide supplementary information, by all means, please do. And it'll be up to the valuation panel if they review that or not. But I implore you to populate these cells with as much information as you possibly can. Now, where you read cells about the questions that they're asking you about, look in the conditions of contract, the conditions of offer, the technical specification administration, and see how they apply to those contracts. For example, under this management question, it says, what management process do you have in place to manage this contract? In the conditions of contract, it actually talks about specific requirements that you have to meet to be able to perform the services on the contract, such as having a person who is of executive making capability is available 24 hours a day. So that's a requirement. So we'd ask you to address how you're going to ensure that occurs on this contract. Now, if you say, please refer to the call center, that won't come on that. We would need to say that you'll have a contract manager in place 24 hours a day to make any executive decisions on the contract. It also talks about monthly meetings and so forth and reporting. So have a look at their reporting clauses in the conditions of contract. Tell us how you are going to conform to that throughout the contract as well. Please don't populate one-worded or numerical numbers. You know, there's a question here that says, does your company have a local office in the or presence in the region? Don't just say yes. Don't just say 5 years. Tell us more about you, more about your capability. You know, if you have presence in Southeast Queensland region, like where your headquarters is, and you've got sub offices or other offices in, you know, Townsville, North Queensland, we need to know that. Tell us about any office and every office that you have in Queensland. If you're subcontracting to other contractors who have got, you know, on the spot up and going capability, let us know. Tell us about what you can do. It might be a short question, but it's actually quite important. Technical experience. Some of you might be manufacturers of the equipment, some of you might not. But if you do have suppliers who you have got long term contracts with and experience with, tell us about that as well. Just give us as much information as possible about the skill of your staff and your ability to procure parts and spares. The communication facilities, if some of you have got satellite phones for working in the regions where you can upload remotely in the back of Mount Isa, if you can just get a satellite phone, update all your information into our web portal quite quickly. If it doesn't require a 24-hour update to a server, tell us about all of that. And we've updated this question, so we're not talking about antiquated equipment. We're not talking about smartphones, 24-hour call centers, 24-hour competent, contactable person. So much information you can give us about your back of office and in the field.
Hello, QBuild registrations this month.
Now, environmental management. This is not required in the contract, but do keep in mind that you're managing lifts where we've got oil and contaminants that will be at the bottom of lift shafts. So if you've got an environmental system, or if you've got an environmental process or procedures that your companies have, please provide that with the tender. It's good information for us to know and evaluate. Obviously, it's not required, but it is advantageous to have it. It's not necessarily the EMS systems, but also talk about your QA systems. If you're certified for quality insurance, it's good for us to know that as well. Reference checks are required, but I would err on the side of using anyone in QBuild as a reference, because they would have to declare a conflict of interest if you were to do that, so try not to do that. Savings, we would like you to talk about, or any ability that you would have to offer us lump sum savings. So on breakdown quotes, whether you're doing a large scale contract with QBuild as opposed to doing individual site contracts, what savings you'd be able to offer us. We would ask for that in a percentage and not include examples. So read through those 3 clauses there as well, and submit it to us with your tender. So, just making sure I've covered off everything, sorry. Yes, the weightings. So these contracts are classified as high complexity contracts by QBuild. So that means that we put a strong emphasis on non-pricing as opposed to pricing. So our tenders for the lifts will be based on a 60% weighting on non-pricing criteria and 40% on pricing criteria. So when populating the non-pricing workbook, this is very important that you populate and give us as much information as you possibly can. Now, as I said, we have repeatedly been going through an updating process. So we've done a lot of industry engagement, and we've updated a lot of our technical specifications, conditions of contract over the last 5 years. Changes to the contracts include the updated Queensland Procurement Policy, Building Industry Fairness Act, and Supplier Ethical Mandate Policy as well. Our conditions of contract has gone through a contract improvement review. So we've aligned our terminology of words or definitions of words, what's in the conditions of contract and as applied to the technical specifications. So there's no anomaly information in there now. We've also changed the likes of appointments and scheduling of appointments. So we no longer will accept 24 hours of appointments. The contractor must do 48 hours of appointments making, but you can do it electronically as well. So we're not requiring you to ring every single time. It's still written in the contract, but you do have an option of emailing the site and getting a confirmation from the client in that manner as well. The technical specifications, such as the administration one, has been updated, and Nick will talk about the performance schedule. I'll just go through some of these documents. So in the invitation to offer document, we list out some of the documents that you'll see when you're downloading it on the e-tender. So the invitation documents will have several different parts. One of the newest things is this contract management plan. We'll now include that with the tender packaging. That document is provided for your information only, but we will be introducing a contract management plan once the contract is up and running, and we will be using that template that we issued with the tender for running that contract going forward. That basically tells you our day-to-day management of the contract, what we're doing, who do you call, what emails, addresses do you use, and so forth. Part 4, that's your pricing, non-pricing workbooks. Part 5 are your technical specifications. So the specification administrative is applicable to all sites in the entire contract, and the same for the condition assessment. The condition assessment is called up where you have a Y or an N for yes or no in the pricing workbook, but they are all a Y for yes. I also forgot to mention that in the pricing workbook, there is a thing called maintenance scope, I believe it is. But for these contracts, we've got a mixture of pricing and non-pricing, preventative maintenance and comprehensive maintenance. So under maintenance scope, you will see a C for comprehensive maintenance or a P for preventative maintenance. Now, that's very important when you're pricing your workbook, primarily because you've got all the comprehensive additional works that you'd have to do where C is identified. We have clarified what that means under the pricing instructions. So P equals preventive maintenance, C equals comprehensive maintenance. That's very important. So not all the plant are comprehensive, not all the plant are preventative maintenance. There's a total mix of scope of work in all the 3 tenders. The specifications will be identified in the technical specification tab in the pricing workbook. So that the pricing workbook tells you what specification applies. Now, if it is a C, you'll have an additional technical specification called a performance schedule, and that applies where a C for comprehensive maintenance is nominated in the pricing workbook. Conditions of contract, that applies, conditions of working with QBuild applies to this entire contract, and that also requires all the contractors to be registered with QBuild. So to win any contracts with us, you must be registered with us, and being registered with us means that you also agree to the conditions of working with QBuild. I'll just quickly go through the conditions of working with QBuild. This document hasn't gone through many changes over the years, but one of the changes that I'll talk about is when you're uploading a breakdown work order through the web portal, not only do you load your invoice into the web portal, you must upload any supporting documents for your breakdown and repair work. So you will have a record of maintenance that will say fixed seals on leaking oil pump, and you must upload that into the web portal with your claim for payment. We do talk about critical defects in the fire processes, but that's only for emergency lifts, of which we haven't included or identified any in the tender. Now, at the very end of the conditions of working with QBuild, it talks about the Queensland procurement policy, the ethical supplier threshold, the principles of the procurement policy, and so forth. So, with ye working as a subcontractor to QBuild, you also fall under and must abide the code of conduct for all Queensland public service employees. So do read through the code of conduct. It talks about, you know, no collusion, reporting of any issues or misconduct, and being impartial and maintaining integrity. So with it being impartial, we've got to be transparent in all of our actions, meaning when you're submitting quotes to us, you must have all of your line items for all your materials, your pricing for labor, attendance fees, and so forth. So we'll be looking for good breakdowns in our quotes to maintain that code of conduct. The code of tendering applies. Now, unfortunately, you will have to, if you want to read it, you'll have to download that from the Standards Australia, the SEI Global Web Shop. Can't remember what that stands for, SEI. This video will also be included in the invitation to offer documents. Under the general conditions of offer, this is where we'll nominate a contact officer for you to talk to. We will be removing all the telephone numbers for the procurement officers, simply because they will not have your tender information, contract documents available at hand to be able to respond to your query over the phone in an instantaneous manner. So we'll be asking you that if you have any queries about the tender, to send an email to the QBuild Southeast Queensland SOA queries mailbox. So all communications straight to there. If you have any tender queries, don't be going to the likes of Nick or Greg or Carol or myself. Just send them all straight to that QBuild SEQ SOA queries mailbox. Now we've got several people who look at that mailbox, and it will be actioned in a professional and quick manner. The closing time will be identified in there, which is 4 weeks from the date of tender. We won't be having any site inspections. So as I said earlier, you'll be pricing on what we've nominated in the workbook, on the information that you have in those workbooks and in the contract documentation. We talk about the indicative timeframes, about the contract from the point of time of tender to tender award. And I believe, at the end of this document, an update that we've done to it that's changed over the years is the ethical supplier threshold. So we ask you to populate that on the non-pricing workbook, make yourself familiar with it, and sign off on it if you agree to it. Of course, read the rest of the entire document as well. It's actually quite important. Now, the conditions of contract is a document that we've had updated for these contracts. As I said earlier, the training policy is not applicable to these contracts. You will need to do security clearances for these contracts. So that's it's no longer with the Queensland Police Service. It's a National Police Clearance Certificate got from the National Police Service. So there's a web page, you go online, download it from that web page. It's identified in the contract. Don't be giving us any third-party clearance documents. We just need it from that National Police Clearance Certificate web page. As I said, in terms of the environmental management systems, quality assurance, it's not required, but it most definitely is preferred. Public liability insurance has increased from 10 million to 20 million. And we've updated the notification to the clients from 24 hours to 48 hours. We've clarified the definition of services. I think at the end of this, yeah, there we go. We've added in the Queensland procurement policy obligations and requirements. So again, this is talking about the ethical supplier mandate, meaning that you must give preference to Queensland products or Australia products. But do read through it and make yourself familiar with that, that mandate. Now, the specification administrative is applicable to the entire contract. And there's a lot of changes that are in here. So normal hours, we've updated that from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We were getting a lot of complaints from contractors and clients about everyone's different meaning of it, but we've set the meaning as being 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. It used to be 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., but we've increased that to cater for our clients. For example, schools are requiring contractors to attend between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. so that there's no impact of student learning. But our contracts previously said 7 a.m. So you only had an hour to do a service on a site that could have 10 lifts, and then you're impacting on student learning. So by us bringing it back to 6 a.m., a lot of technicians and contractors were working at that time anyhow and had requested that they could commence at 6 a.m. So we've allowed that for the benefit of the contractors to get the work done and also to help out the clients. But some of the clients have said, hey, we finish work here at 6 p.m. They can come in here. It's not after hours. We don't want to be charged after hours. So where you might have a company that works from 7 to 3 or 6 to 2, with it being normal business hours for our clients up until 6 p.m., we've had to keep it at 6 p.m. That also meets our own enterprise bargaining agreements for QBuild. Services has been updated, as I said earlier, so that's been made uniform throughout the contract where the definitions were, and the use of the word was quite different. In the offer response workbook, we talk about the major service plan date. All right. Now, our tolerances and our service tolerances for the work is set out in table 1 in this document. So we can see here where it says a monthly service, you've got plus to minus 3 days to do that work. However, for the lift contracts where it's a monthly service, we'll be setting the work order start date as being the 1st of the month and the work order required finish date as being in the end of the month. So we want you to do that monthly service in that month. So that will be almost a relaxation of this table, table 1 for your tolerances. So do keep in mind when you're tendering for this workbook, because if it's done in that, if the work order is scheduled for that month, we want you to do it in that month. No ifs or buts, that still must be done in that month. If it's a 5-yearly or 10-yearly service, it still must be done in that month. And that's how we'll manage your KPIs, and that's how we'll score your KPI 2 and KPI 3. In the web portal, we want you to complete the work order via the web portal. That's including uploading the service report, uploading the invoice, no later than 5 days after completing the work. So if the work is due to finish on the 28th of February, on the 5th of March, you must have that work order finalized and finished in the web portal. On the 6th of March, we will check your KPI scores and look to see that you have done that. Every claim must be supported with a record of maintenance. Now, with some of the lift works, with the lift works being far more expensive than a standard, aircon service, some of them running into the thousands per site per month, we're looking for that in value in a service report. So where a service report has got tick and flicks, we're looking for a copy of those ticks and flicks. Have you checked the workplace health and safety requirements? Have you checked the oils? Have you checked the doors? Have you checked the speeds? We want all those checks and balances to be in the report that you're issuing to QBuild. We'll be improving the quality of these services by not accepting just a simple statement anymore to say, yes, this work was done. If it's a site that comprehensive site that you choose not to go on that second, on a second month or every biannual month, you'll have to talk to the contract manager about what will be acceptable for that month where you deliberately did not attend the site because the lift is brand new and it's an excellent service and it's not required. In this document here, it talks about the requirements for a preventative maintenance service and a comprehensive maintenance services. So that's the C and P back in the pricing workbook. And it says here in clause A, both of these clauses were specified in offers response workbook. So that's what we're talking about, the C and the P. I just can't stress that enough. For the breakdown services in the comprehensive maintenance services, it talks about the performance schedule. So that's where a difference comes into play between the preventative and comprehensive. Comprehensive plant and systems have a performance schedule applied to them, which is a separate technical specification. And Nick will talk about that in a moment. It talks about, attending sites, making sure there's no malfunctions. So KPI 4 will come into play for the comprehensive maintenance schedules. So this is where we're talking about KPIs. Now KPI 4 comes in where you've got false response times for comprehensive contracts. So all of this is based on your performance schedule technical specification and how you score that and how we verify that. KPI 1, 2, and 3. There's good details in here about how it's all managed and what we're looking for and what's expected. You can read through it. If you have any questions, flick an email off to procurement during the tender process. But I believe that we've covered it off quite well here. One of the most important things that I should stress, what the score is. So we're saying that for you to get an adequate score, like you adequately are performing to the requirements of the contract, you need to get 95% of that scheduled work done, finished, uploaded to the web portal on time every month. So if you've only got 4 work orders and you miss 1 work order for that month, that's a KPI score of 0. So it's quite a high percentage requirement, but it has been demonstrated repeatedly that that can easily be achieved. Now, if you get 100%, you're exceeding the requirements of the contract and you're getting a superior score of 5. So ideally what we're looking for is KPI 1, score of 5, KPI 2, score of 3, KPI 3, score of 3, KPI 4, score of 5. All right, so if you see this, we want 100% compliance to response times as set out in the performance schedule. That's quite important that you read through that and understand it. Everyone should be familiar with all of these requirements for the performance evaluations, what we're looking for. And when we're undertaking performance evaluations, we can actually, at a moment's whim, hop up and go out and do an audit of the site and just check any lift in any site to make sure that, well, any sites is under contract, to make sure that you're performing well. So if we get a customer complaint, we can go to site, we can investigate that, and then under the KPIs, we can actually review that based on performance evaluations. So KPI 3 would be taken into consideration when we're doing performance evaluations on some of these items. We've updated the requirements of the logbooks, so read through it, and the service reports to make sure that you're familiar with those requirements and what we're looking for when uploaded into the web portal. These fire protection systems will only impact the contract if and when you identify there's any emergency lift on site. An emergency lift is classified as a fire protection system under the Fire Emergency Services Act, so we'd be asking for additional reporting requirements when we, if we identify any of those items. So defect reports, any and all defects are to be identified and reported to QBuild, and we want a couple of items there to be identified in those defect reports. And that can be you just simply sending through a quote if it's stuff that's outside a terms and conditions of the contract, such as vandalism. But if it's a defects report where it falls part of the preventative or the comprehensive maintenance, you are still to provide that to us in a monthly report. As a client notification is 48 hours, it can be done via telephone or email. When you're notifying the site, you must tell them impact to a site, so it's the high rise, so you need to advise the site 48 hours in advance of any of those issues. Security clearances, if you've got any correctional centers in this contract, you just be aware that there are additional security clearances for those sites. When you're tendering, you just got to make sure that you read this and be aware of it. Now, the fault response times are where we're issuing you breakdown work orders and we identify a fault response time in that, and you must adhere to those fault response times. Now, there are specific requirements in the performance schedule for entrapments, breakdowns, and repairs to comprehensively maintained lifts, and they take precedence over this. So it is important to read that performance schedule. The safe to operate statement, there's an example of it in here in this document, but please try to use the most up-to-date one on WorkSafe Queensland, and these are required annually in July for the previous financial year. Also, when we're managing the KPIs for all the work orders, if you try to get into a site and you're repeatedly being denied access, if the site is closed down to COVID-19 as an example, we need you to keep our staff, the QBuild staff, informed of your attempts, what's going on, why are you being rejected to site, if we decide to delay the service or cancel the service, we want to do that before we do the KPI score for that work order. So if it's something that we decide to postpone or change the finish date, expected finish date of that work order, we need you to be promptly telling us what you recommend to do, what we should do, and then we'll take an action on that. Sometimes it might require us just gaining access to that site by getting a key from a facility manager or the client. But communication back and forth between you and us and QBuild is very, very important to maintain your KPI, good relationships, and also to keep those clients quite happy. Now, also, when you're trying to attempt to gain access to a site and you're not getting a response, or you're getting a response to say, hey, we are shut, or sorry, a better example is where you request access to a site, you're approved access by the client, you turn up the site, but the client has closed down the site. That is an agreed appointment made by the client, and you'd be entitled to a non-service fee. So we would need you to provide evidence of those emails or any notes that you would have provided in trying to make that attempted service, but where you had made an appointment and the client failed to hold up their side of things. So what I'll do now is I'll just pass over to Nick so that he can talk about the specific Maintenance services and performance schedule. Sorry, bear with me. Sorry, Nick, I just need to unmute. Ah, there you go.
Good to go?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Ronan. Everyone, I'm Nick Rhodes. I manage the lift contracts statewide with the support from regional officers that Ronan has already outlined at the start of the presentation. Just going to be going through the performance schedule, which Ronan has also touched on throughout the presentation here, relating to comprehensive services. Performance of maintenance services. Contractor shall maintain the lift machinery and equipment listed in the offer's response workbook to a standard that achieves the performance criteria as detailed in the performance schedule. Got the performance review, KPI scores here. 3 is good, 2 adequate, 1 needs improvement, 0 inadequate. Now, these KPIs are in addition to the KPIs 1 to 4, which Ronan has just outlined before from the admin specification. So we have response times here, response times measured upon each entrapment. 30 minutes during normal working hours, 60 minutes outside normal working hours. Monthly reporting on the response time to stoppages and malfunctions not requiring urgent attention shall not be greater than 60 minutes during normal working hours, 120 minutes outside the normal working hours. Go on, measures reliability, more, that's monthly reporting as well. Number of faults, passenger entrapments, stoppages and malfunctions shall be limited to 6 or less per lift per annum. Availability, but apply to each lift installation where identified on offerer's response workbook. This is 12 monthly. Keep going on to more 12 monthly reporting. Floor leveling accuracy. Door operation, 12 monthly. The lift speeds, 12 monthly. And flight times. We go on, lift ride quality, 12 monthly. Group control system performance, 12 monthly. Low-rise lifts and high-rise lifts. Ronan also touched on earlier with the annual condition reports. It's in addition to the condition assessments, which is the spreadsheet. This template here, which Ronan has shown earlier, there will be an email address that these are to be sent to, which we identify in the contract management plan. Specific email address for those to be sent to, not directly to myself or the regions. Ronan, is there anything else that I need to touch on or have missed before handing back on the specifications?
No, I think you've covered it all off. That's really good. All right. Cool. Thank you, Nick. All right. So we move on to the evaluation of offers. When QBuild are evaluating the tender, we will have an evaluation panel made up of 3 members. That will be a person from the QBuild procurement. We'll have a technical officer who will be familiar with lifts and lift contracts and what's required of them. And we'll also have an agency partner. So we'll have someone from one of our clients, for example. Now, as I pointed out earlier, all 3 of those companies may not have any dealings with your company, so it's important that you set out all your answers in the submission to QBuild to address all of our questions as clearly and as accurately as possible. All of our tenders will be done in accordance with the Queensland Government Procurement Guidelines and policies and our own internal policies. We'll be evaluating the non-price criteria first, and then shortlisting companies who will go on to evaluate their pricing workbooks and then we'll score them, and we find out who scores the best and commence awards. Yeah, and all scorings will be purely based on the information that you submit during the tenders. Included in the tender documents is the contract management plan. This is a document that we've started using on a lot of the contracts, and we go through a lot of information in here about how we manage the contract on a day-to-day basis. So the communication plan, so who you talk to, who attends meetings, what you do if there's an emergency, what we do if there's an escalation meeting, how we manage all the KPIs and how we reflect that into a 2-way street to improve performance. So if there's anything wrong on the QBuild side, what can we do to improve? What can we do to simplify things? And if there's anything wrong on your side, how do we work with you to improve it? How do we help make things work better for us all to get better KPIs? In the undertaking of services, we talk quite extensively about, site contacts, who do you send specific emails to when you've done work. So you can see here just special access for residential properties, correctional centres, logbooks, addressing issues. So if you've got to put a lift out of service, what do we do and what do you do to help the client continue on operation in their building by having another lift open or just postponing works? It's all written in here what we should do and the best practices. Services, so we talk about what we're looking on the service reports and with breakdown attendees. So I talk about the timeframes that Nick was referring to in the performance schedules for comprehensive maintenance. And there are a lot more of site contacts, email addresses, where to send the safe to operate documents, all written in here as well. Talks about, what do we do at the end of the financial year, condition assessments, what we're looking for, how to manage that, variations and what we do with the variations. So this will be provided with the tender, and if anything in there causes you any concern or you want to ask any questions about it, I wouldn't worry about asking that during tender, because that contract management plan is an agreed plan between you and QBuild. So we shall work together to draft up a plan that will work well for both parties. And we can make changes however we want and wherever we want as we're moving through the contract and that as well. So coming near to the end, if you want any additional information about registrations with QBuild, there's a link here within this presentation, but you can just Google registration with QBuild, partnering with QBuild. It's all on the Energy and Public Works webpage. There's lots of information up there. There's information on Q tenders and E tenders and how to tender and what to do about registration and subscribing to the web pages and how to tender. All the information in today's presentation and the contract management plan and all the documents that we've gone through will be available in the tender package. Now the tender support, as I said, all queries must be via email and must go to the SEQ SOA queries mailbox. And that's it. So I'll just go across to questions and answers. And I did see a query earlier on from Reese. He was just asking me to go in closer to one of the workbooks. I have to just bear with me. I'm going to allow everybody to unmute. Just take me a moment. Okay. Now, if you want to ask a question, you can type it into the show conversation box, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. But one of the workbooks, Reese just wanted to know, if I could zoom in. So I assume that it's the non-pricing workbook?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so these are the questions in the non-pricing workbook. So these questions haven't really changed or been modified over the last couple of years, but we have just tweaked the words that were used. So where we talked about phone, which used the word smartphone, I think we updated a little bit in the technical experience as well. Sorry, can you read that?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I know you mentioned before we get copies of these documents at the tender stage. Are we able to get copies of all these documents in the PowerPoint before that? If any, just for me to review this afternoon, if possible. Is there a way to email them through?
Well, we're not going to change these questions going to tender, but I could copy and paste these questions into an email and send them out. So at least you'd know these questions on this tab and what they would be.
And the PowerPoint, if possible, the PowerPoint you've been running off today, could that be sent as well? Or?
Yes, the PowerPoint will be available on YouTube, hopefully within 48 hours. I can send a link to everybody who attended today.
Brilliant. Oh, good. Thank you.
So I'll just talk about this a little bit more. So we do say, please provide details of 5 recent service maintenance contracts comparable to the services to be undertaken for each of the contract. So where in the pricing workbook it says what an equipment description is, such as a lift, a travel ladder, a dummy waiter lift. We want you to use similar words and similar terminology when you're talking about comparable to the services to be undertaken. So we'd like you to say, hey, I've done these services on these 5 contracts and so forth. Yeah, it's okay to say lift services as well. But some people have said we've done these services, but we're like, what are these services? So it's important to just refer to lifts or the type of servicing that we do. We ask for 5 contracts, and then the duration, the value of the contracts and what you're doing. So sometimes people just give us one big huge contract rather than 5 contracts. We ask for 5, so we expect 5. Technical expertise, yeah, that's, you know, I don't believe it's a licensed trade, but if you have qualifications given from manufacturers or providers, that'd be very good to know about. Yeah, Gavin, that's a fair question. Gavin is asking, are there no site inspections where we can do a dilapidation report for the run-in period to the start of the contract? Within the contract, it says that any defects are to be identified within the first 3 months of setting up the contract. That's in the conditions of contract and technical administration document. So we're not asking for dilapidation report. There's no mention of that word anywhere in the contract, but we would expect at your first service or your first major service, if you identify any major issues, that you'd bring it to our attention straight away, particularly for comprehensive contracts. Nick, if you can confirm that most of the major services on the comprehensive list are within the first 3 months of the contract, is that right? Or they're spread out?
Well, they're going to be spread out. I mean, depending what the major service date is, they're not all July to September. It could be anywhere within some could have been June on the current contract where the major service dates are set.
Yeah. So I think, Gavin, that's your question. It's more take each situation and each plant as it comes along. So when your technicians are there doing a monthly service, if they notice anything majorly wrong with the monthly, they'll be identifying it there and then. If it's anything that you believe is outside the terms and conditions of the contract, that's something that should be done by the incumbent, yeah, please bring it to our attention. Photos always help with something like that. So if you have smartphones that have got photos, that's something good to mention in the tender submission, and something that we really like, because getting quotes with photos is superb. Thank you. So I'll just scroll down there if you want to just read the rest of the non-pricing workbook questions. Cool. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I will stay online for another 15-20 minutes, so if anyone wants to ask me any questions afterwards, I'm here at your whim, but I'll just end the presentation and the recording just now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronan.